Welcome to African Premium News, where Africa speaks for itself. We bring you the real stories shaping the continent: innovation, power, culture, and truth without compromise. No filters, no spin. Just Africa raw, brilliant, and unstoppable. Subscribe now and be part of the movement that's changing the narrative. This is African Premium News, Africa's voice, redefined. In the heart of 20th century Senegal, a young scientist looked at the history books and saw a silence. He saw a continent described only as a shadow of others, its civilizations treated as footnotes. His name was Cheikh Anta Diop, and he would spend his life proving, through physics, linguistics, and archaeology, that Africa had always been a center of human knowledge. Born in 1923 in Diourbel, Senegal, Diop grew up during French colonial rule. At just 23, he left for Paris to study mathematics, chemistry, and nuclear physics at the Sorbonne. Paris was rebuilding after war, but Diop's mission was larger than reconstruction. It was redefinition. He wanted to rebuild Africa's place in world science. While other students memorized the European timeline, Diop asked a radical question. What if the roots of global civilization were African? His professors called it impossible. Yet Diop gathered evidence, carbon dating, comparative linguistics, cultural anthropology, to support his claim that ancient Egypt was not a distant Near Eastern culture, but an African one. To him, this was not myth-making, it was scientific correction. At France's Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, he trained in atomic spectroscopy and radiocarbon dating. These were cutting-edge technologies of the 1940s, and Diop learned to apply them to history itself. He measured pigments, analyzed skeletal melanin, and studied the migration of languages from the Nile to the Niger. His approach was multidisciplinary decades before the word became popular. But every discovery brought resistance. The idea that Africa could be the origin of civilization challenged colonial narratives still shaping global education. Academic journals rejected his papers. Some conferences refused to let him speak. For years, his research circulated mainly among African intellectuals and students hungry for evidence that their continent had always been a producer, not just a consumer, of knowledge. In 1951, he submitted his doctoral thesis, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, to the Sorbonne. It was denied twice. Examiners argued his conclusions were political, not scientific. Undeterred, he reworked the data, adding hundreds of references, carbon dating results, and linguistic parallels. Only in 1960 was he finally awarded his doctorate. The same year, Senegal achieved independence. Returning home, Diop founded the Radiocarbon Laboratory at the University of Dakar, the first of its kind in Africa. With limited funding and equipment often salvaged from European institutions, he began dating ancient African artifacts on African soil, proof that world-class science could exist south of the Sahara. He also entered politics, briefly aligning with Senegal's independence movement. But politics was never his main arena. His revolution was intellectual. In 1964, he published The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. The book exploded across universities, challenging textbooks from Cairo to California. To African students, it was liberation. To many Western scholars, it was provocation. Yet over time, evidence vindicated him. Genetic studies, linguistic mapping, and archaeology have since confirmed that early Egyptian populations were part of Africa's indigenous diversity, not foreign implants. Diop had seen what later science would prove, that human history cannot be neatly divided by colonial geography. Beyond Egyptology, his influence reshaped linguistics. He traced grammatical structures between ancient Egyptian and modern Wolof, Fulani, and other West African languages, proposing a deep family tree of African speech. Even those who debated his methods recognized his brilliance. He showed that African languages carried complex logic and philosophy long before contact with Europe or Arabia. In his Dakar laboratory, Diop trained a new generation of African researchers, chemists, physicists, and historians who combined laboratory precision with cultural purpose. He encouraged them to question every imported assumption, to look for data that spoke in African voices. But recognition came slowly. Western institutions cited him less than his impact deserved. Major encyclopedias omitted his name. For decades, African children learned of Newton and Einstein, but not of the Senegalese scholar who built Africa's first carbon dating lab, and rewrote the continent's ancient timeline. Cheikh Anta Diop died in 1986, at 62. In the years that followed, UNESCO adopted many of his ideas in the general history of Africa, a project uniting hundreds of historians to rewrite global history with Africa at its center. In 1987, Senegal renamed its national university University Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar, a tribute carved not in marble, but in education. Today his influence reaches beyond Africa. Scholars in genetics, archaeology, and cultural studies cite Diop as a pioneer of decolonizing science, the movement to study humanity without inherited bias. His insistence on evidence over ideology is now standard academic practice. Yet outside academia, his name remains little known. In classrooms worldwide, the story of human civilization still begins in Mesopotamia or Greece, rarely on the Nile's southern banks. That absence is the quiet erasure his life sought to end. Diop's message was never that Africa was superior, only that truth is universal when all voices are heard. He proved that knowledge suppressed is not knowledge lost, it waits for rediscovery. As the African Union invests in new research centers, as young engineers build solar drones and quantum prototypes, Diop's vision echoes through every laboratory. A scientifically self-reliant Africa contributing to the world's understanding of itself. The forgotten inventor who changed the world did not build machines or weapons. He built a framework for thinking. He gave Africa back its scientific past, so it could design its future. Narrator pause. And so, when the world finally tells the story of civilization again, measured not by empire but by evidence, Cheikh Anta Diop will no longer be a footnote. He will be the chapter where history remembers that Africa, too, invented the modern mind.